The mid 2010s were defined by scale, blockbuster budgets, open worlds measured in square miles, marketing campaigns that rivaled Hollywood premieres. In 2015 and 2016, the biggest games in the world weren't just releases, they were platforms. They launched with season passes, roadmap promises, and multiplayer ecosystems designed to keep players engaged for years. And then, in February of 2016, a farming game made largely by one developer quietly appeared on Steam. No publisher, no massive marketing push, no live service infrastructure, just a rundown farm, a handful of seeds, and the freedom to take your time. What happened next wasn't just a success story, it was a shift in how players responded to sincerity, pacing, and trust in an era built on spectacle. Today, we're exploring how Stardew Valley grew from a solo passion project into one of the most beloved games of its decade, how Eric Barone built an unusual relationship with his audience, and why a game some jokingly call a chore simulator became a cultural landmark. Join us as we harvest the story behind Stardew Valley on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello, and welcome to the 287th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. This week, we are talking about Stardew Valley, the 2016 farming role playing game created almost entirely by one developer, Eric Barone, during a time when the industry was dominated by massive budgets, live service roadmaps, and blockbuster spectacle. What began as a personal project inspired by the Harvest Moon series quickly became something much bigger. A game that built an unusual level of trust between community creator and community and proved that scale wasn't the only way to make an impact. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, a guy who would absolutely min-max a pixelated farm before breakfast and still somehow forgot to water his parsnips. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, if you inherited a rundown farm tomorrow, are you planting crops, raising livestock, or immediately trying to optimize profit margins?
Dave, I'm gonna call my buddy Paul because he helps run a farm, and I might know how to quote unquote run a farm, but I don't really know how to run a farm. So we're gonna ask for opinion on how do you plant some crops, how do you raise some livestock, and how do we make our profit margins the best we can.
That's literally what the question is. It's how to run a farm, right? You plant crops, you raise livestock, and you optimize profit margins. What else is there?
Yeah, Dave, but how do you do it? How do you plant a crop? How do you raise livestock? And how do you optimize those profit margins? Just because we know that we have to doesn't mean we know how to.
Valid point. Let's give Paul a call, shall we?
Maybe later.
Maybe later.
He's a farmer. He's got to get up early, Dave.
But you also play Farming Simulator all the time. Are you telling me that Farming Simulator doesn't teach you how to, run a farm?
Well, Dave, does Car Mechanic Simulator teach you how to fix a car?
Touche.
Does Battlefield teach you how to be a soldier?
Does
Exactly.
Ninja Gaiden teach you how to be a ninja?
I am pretty sneaky, so possibly.
Does Yonoi teach you how to be a pizza mascot?
I have no idea on that one, Dave. But does Parappa the Rapper teach you how to be a rapper?
Oh, that's a good one. That is a fantastic one. So on the topic of you played Farming Simulator, have you played Stardew Valley?
It's on my list. I have it downloaded, but I never actually got around to playing it. It just never came to fruition with the friend that I'd planned on it with, so it sits and wait.
There is a 4-person like map built into the game specifically, so
Hmm.
Let's get at it.
Pitter patter.
I have countless hours at Stardew. I'm not even going to front about it.
Yeah, I know, Dave. I've definitely seen your playtime on that game, but we won't compare it to any of mine because we know that I'm much worse.
Bad. Yeah,
Much worse.
we know that you have one specific example. Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sirree. All right. Well, before we get into Stardew's story, why don't you, good sir, tell our listeners what else has happened during the current week in gaming history?
Alrighty, well, kicking it off on February 23rd, 1989, Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego was released as a unique state specific entry in the broader Carmen Sandiego franchise. Developed in collaboration with Broderbund and North Dakota educators, the game reimagined the familiar globetrotting detective formula within the borders of a single U.S. state. Unlike the mainline entries, this version was funded through state support and tailored directly to school curricula, reflecting a moment when educational software experimentation was at its peak. Though only a limited number of copies were distributed and similar state focused sequels never materialized, Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego remains a fascinating example of how the franchise briefly adapted to hyper local educational goals.
What would in where in Michigan is Carmen Sandiego have in it?
Well, it'd be a mix of urban areas and farms.
Yeah, but where would we go? Like Kazoo, Ann Arbor,
Uh,
Detroit.
Grand Rapids, Detroit. You might hit like Sault Ste. Marie,
Ooh, good one.
Traverse City,
Yep, that's great. That's
and I don't
great.
know the UP as well. So maybe like just off of Cockburn Island.
They only sold 5,000 copies of the North Dakota version of Carmen Sandiego. So
Okay, but how many people live in North Dakota, Dave? That might be like a good percentage of the population.
it's probably the majority of the population.
Exactly. So that's pretty damn good.
Valid point. All right, what else happened during this week?
Well, next, on February 24th, 1995, Front Mission was released in Japan for the Super Famicom. Developed and published by Square, the game blended tactical grid based combat with customizable mechs known as Wanzers. Unlike traditional fantasy RPGs of the era, Front Mission leaned into political drama and near future military conflict, establishing a darker, more grounded tone. It would go on to launch a long running strategy RPG franchise and mark one of Square's earliest major experiments outside of its Final Fantasy formula.
That's a fantastic game. Who doesn't like giant mechs?
You know I love them, Dave. So I say let's find it and play it.
And role playing games, put them together. That sounds like a winning formula. We should add that to the list.
I agree. Although RPGs are a little less my thing, but hey, I can get through them.
Okay.
Next up, on February 27th, 2001, The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons and The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages were released in North America for the Game Boy Color. Developed by Capcom in partnership with Nintendo, the two titles were built as interconnected adventures. Seasons emphasize combat and environmental manipulation, while Ages focus more on puzzle and time travel. Using a password system, players could link the games together, unlocking expanded story elements and a true final confrontation with Ganon. Originally conceived as part of a planned trilogy, the Oracle games remain one of the most ambitious experiments in handheld Zelda history.
Have you ever played those, either of those?
No, Dave, my Zelda gameplay is very limited to just the very, very big titles, which, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom. So while I do probably know at least one person who's played them, it ain't me.
Someone out there is going to have to tell me what they're like because I don't think I know anybody who has played them.
Well,
I
I'll ask around, and a former guest of our show might be able to tell you.
Let me know. We'll add them to the need to do a topic on them list.
There we go. We can do an episode and invite him on.
Let's do it.
Alrighty. Well, next up, on February 26, 2002, Command and Conquer Renegade was released for PC, marking a bold departure for the long running RTS franchise. Developed by Westwood Studios, the game shifted the perspective from top down strategy to first person action, placing players directly on the battlefield of the Siberian conflict. In its single player campaign, players assumed the role of a GDI commando fighting against the Brotherhood of Nod, revisiting locations and units familiar to fans of the original Command and Conquer. The multiplayer mode stood out in particular, blending shooter mechanics with base building and resource management elements drawn from the RTS roots of the series. While reception was mixed, Renegade remains a notable experiment in franchise reinvention and an early attempt to merge large scale strategy with first person gameplay.
I when I wrote this recently, I remembered that they did a modern remake of this called Renegade X. So I went and I downloaded it, and nobody plays it. There's only like two people on a server, but I felt very much like reminiscent of Halo LAN Party. So I think that we should get everyone together and do a giant game of Renegade X. It looks like it has potential to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, let's do a Renegade X WAN party.
Yeah, LAN, WAN, come over and
Thank you,
join the
man.
Discord. Come over and join the Discord, and let's all get together and do a giant shooting party.
Yeah, let's do it. And we obviously mean in a video game and not IRL.
That's exactly right.
Well, Dave, speaking of giant shooter parties, it was on February 22nd, 2011, that Bulletstorm was released for PS3, Xbox 360, and PC, delivering an over the top twist on the modern shooter formula. Developed by People Can Fly and published by Electronic Arts, the game followed disgraced soldier Grayson Hunt on a revenge fueled rampage across a hostile alien world. Rather than rewarding straightforward kills, Bulletstorm encouraged creativity through its skill shot system, granting bonus points for stylish, inventive, and often absurd eliminations. The combination of fast paced gunplay, environmental hazards, and a leash mechanic that pulled enemies into range set it apart from more grounded military shooters of the era. Though its humor and excess divided some critics, Bulletstorm earned praise for its mechanical depth and unapologetic embrace of arcade style spectacle in a generation dominated by realism.
Bulletstorm was a lot of fun. It was kind of like that summer action flick that you go into without you don't need to think about a summer action movie. You just go in to have some fun, and that sums up Bulletstorm to a T. Just a really fun action game.
It sounds like a lot of fun, David. It's surprisingly another one that never really crossed my library.
That's a shame.
Indeed, it is. But I don't think people are here to talk about Bulletstorm. So why don't we use this moment to go ahead and talk about today's topic?
Absolutely. If you zoom out and look at the video game industry 10, 11 years ago, 2015, 2016, one thing becomes clear: the pattern, right? Scale ruled everything. Best selling games in 2015 included titles like Call of Duty Black Ops 3 and Fallout 4, both of which that would go on to sell well over 20 million copies worldwide. Grand Theft Auto 5 was still charting years after its original release. Here, it was bolstered by online updates and re releases across console generations.
Well, let's be real, Dave. GTA 5 is still charting at this point. It seems like it's such a big game.
It's a huge game. Speaking of which, Grand Theft Auto 6 going to be much bigger. I saw someone estimate recently that it's now topping $2 billion with a B.
What the fuck?
Yeah, it's going to be
Now
the most expensive single piece of media ever created.
we just really have to hope that it doesn't flop because at a price point of 20 bill, holy fuck.
Or we have to make it flop to let them know we're tired of all the BS, one or the other.
Yeah, but if they make a great game, Dave, let's be real.
Yeah,
We're not going to do that.
Yeah, it'll be a good game. All these big franchises, they weren't just succeeding, they were the infrastructure of the gaming industry, right? In 2016, that trend continued. You had The Division and Uncharted 4 and Battlefield 1. These aren't just games, they're like foundational releases. They've got the backing of global marketing campaigns and collector's editions, and they get our excitement up with cinematic trailers and produce multi-year roadmaps. They're selling these games to us with a retail price of $59.99. These deluxe editions have season passes that you can also purchase separately for $40. You've got all these live service models that were becoming increasingly standard. On PC specifically, where we're going today, early access it was becoming the dominant strategy. Survival crafting games like Rust and Ark Survival Evolved were thriving. Multiplayer shooters were dominating viewership on Twitch. And all this competitive play and streaming visibility was genuinely shaping the buying habits of the market. If you wanted to compete in this environment at the top of the sales charts in early 2016, you had to go bigger, you had to be louder, you had to be more persistent. 10 years ago, during the week of February 26, 2016, Steam's top sellers page genuinely reflected that reality. Fallout 4 was near the top. Pre-orders for Tom Clancy's The Division were climbing. Far Cry Primal had just released. And tucked beneath them was this little pixel art farming simulator. It was priced at $14.99. There was no season pass, no pre-order bonuses. It had not gotten a cinematic reveal at E3. It was there. That game, of course, was Stardew Valley, right? Within 12 days of release, it had sold roughly 400,000 copies. By early April, that number passed 830,000 copies.
God damn.
Mm-hmm. It was competing directly with titles that cost 4 times as much and were built by teams of hundreds. In fact, in the years that followed, it would go on to sell more than 50 million copies worldwide.
Holy shit.
But in that moment, 10 years ago, it was simply a quiet little farming role-playing game sitting comfortably alongside the biggest franchises in the world. Now, to understand how we got there, we have to rewind back a few years to a recent college graduate who genuinely wasn't trying to reshape the industry. Eric Barone had just graduated from college in 2011 with a degree in computer science. On paper, that sounds like a stable launch pad.
That's what you think.
Right? And the reality was otherwise. In reality, he wasn't sure what came next. He applied for jobs and he went on interviews. Nothing came of any of them. The path forward wasn't so clear. What was clear, though, was something that he had loved for years, right? Growing up, Barone had spent countless hours playing the early Harvest Moon games, especially Back to Nature on the PlayStation. Those games left an impression on him. They weren't flashy or complicated. He liked the fact that they were simple, immersive, and strangely addictive. To him, they created the feeling of living inside another world. But as the Harvest Moon series continued into the 2000s, he felt that something had shifted. Barone has said that the mechanics became more linear, that the systems didn't evolve the way he had hoped. So he searched for an alternative, right? He began looking for a PC farming game that captured that older feeling, the freedom, the immersion, the quiet rhythm of tending a farm.
And when he couldn't find it, I'm guessing he made it.
Well, one would assume so, considering why we're here today.
That's a good point, Dave.
Now, around this same time, he was trying to sharpen his programming skills, right? If he was going to land a job in tech, when he was going to land a job in tech, he needed a portfolio. He needed projects in his portfolio. Something small, something manageable. So he decides that he wants to build a Harvest Moon style game. It wasn't a grand statement. He didn't see it as some industry disruption. I don't even think he thought in the beginning that he was going to even do anything with it. It was literally just a practice project. It was a way for him to program in it was a way for him to program and keep his skills sharp when he had nothing else going on. And so his idea at first, was modest. It was going to be a small project. It was maybe going to be something that he could release on what was called Xbox Live Indie Games. That was a platform that Xbox had that was separate from their normal Xbox Live, gaming network, that was designed for indie gamers, where you could make a development profile and just make a very basic game. His idea was that he was going to put a project together that would only take a couple months of work. But obviously, given our conversation, what began as a way to improve his resume slowly became something else entirely. By 2012, Barone had put an early version of his game, which was then called Sprout Valley, onto what was called Steam Greenlight. Now, if you don't remember Steam Greenlight, it was the precursor to the Steam store we have now. Greenlight was basically everyone was throwing their titles onto Steam Greenlight, and then some of them would get picked by Steam for distribution on the Steam platform itself. It wasn't a guarantee. It was kind of everyone was throwing their things on there, and whatever was most popular, Steam would say, "Okay, you can, we'll let you publish this on our platform."
In other
Nowadays,
words, Steam would give them the green light.
oh, nice. Things are very different nowadays. Nowadays it's a pretty open platform. Steam Greenlight was kind of the gateway between not allowing any developers and what we have now. So we have Sprout Valley. Sprout Valley had art that was simpler, systems that were rougher, but the core idea was still there. You inherit a farm, you rebuild it, you build relationships, and you explore the world that you're put in. So he has Sprout Valley and he continues to work on it, right? Brony has said that on average, he estimates that he worked around 10 hours a day for 7 days a week, roughly
God damn.
70 hours a week. And we're not talking like a sprint where he does this for a few days, a few weeks, or even a few months. He has said for years, for the
God
better part of four
damn.
years, for the better part of 4 years, he worked extensively on this project. He was living with his girlfriend at the time, largely supported by her graduate school stipend, and he worked part time as a theater usher to help to help them make ends meet, right? And the rest of his time went completely into the game itself. Now, being a computer science major, he had a skill set, right? He programmed the systems, he designed the mechanics, he wrote the dialogue. But the reality was that he had to kind of teach himself the rest of the process, right? He had never done pixel art before, so he learned how to draw pixel art. He drew every single tile, every single character sprite, came up with every single building. There is the entirety of the game. I mean, let's be honest. What we know about Stardew Valley is that it was a one man crew, right? He made the entire game, so uh, every bit of art is his. It seems silly saying it, but it's the truth. He had limited experience composing music, so he taught himself and created the entire soundtrack. Now, that being said, he did know music. He just didn't know how to uh make it digital, right? He had experience with music in the past. He has played in some bands. He was in a new metal band. He was in an experimental pop band. In fact, when he played with the experimental pop band, he created his first ever video game. It was a Lucas Arts inspired point and click that kind of like advertised the one of their albums type deal. As Barone's skill sets improved, he often scrapped his earlier work and rebuilt it from scratch. The first versions, by his own admission, were not very good, so he redid them over and over and over again. He has, in later interviews, described the development process as moving in waves. There were periods of intense productivity, followed by stretches where he barely worked at all. And admittedly, he has said there were moments where he wanted to quit entirely. To him, the biggest challenges were not the technical ones, they were the psychological ones. 4 years is a long time in video games and in life, right?
Absolutely, Dave.
Between 2012 and 2016, an entire console generation shifted. Gaming trends rose and fell. Steam's marketplace became more crowded every year. Like I said, we went from green light to a more open marketplace. There were thousands of indie titles launching annually. And so as he's making this, he's understanding that visibility is becoming harder, that discoverability is becoming harder. And all the while, he's just working on his little farming game, wondering if it's even going to make a dent in the gaming market at this point, right?
Right.
There was the added stress of having his professional future tied to one uncertain project, the social pressure of explaining to friends and family why he was still working on quote unquote that farming game,
Nice. That's wild.
and the financial reality of scraping by while pouring, 70 hours a week into something that might never sell. That's a thing right there, let's be honest. That's, I mean, 70 hours a week for 4 years without any financial contribution from the project in any way, shape, or form. That's impressive. That's this podcast. You know what I mean? I mean,
I mean, yeah, that's fair. God
so
damn.
at times development would stall entirely and weeks would go by with little progress. His motivation would drop. And then the surge would come back. And again, he described it as waves. They were intense stretches of productivity followed by burnout. He wasn't just building a game, right? He was wagering his 20s on it, let's be honest.
Yeah.
At one point, he said that he had to convince himself that he wasn't delusional, that he wasn't simply wasting time chasing something unrealistic. Let's be honest, there was no guarantee that anyone would care because as he worked, the indie landscape was also changing. Early access games were absolutely everywhere. It was common to release a game unfinished, just as it is today. Now it's probably worse, right?
Probably.
And early access, for those of you who don't know, is you release a game before it's complete. You get people to buy it in early access, and then you take that money and the feedback, hopefully, from your current base to finish the game and attract more people to buy it. With Stardew Valley, Eric Barone chose not to do that. He, again, put the game on Greenlight in 2012. And as part of Greenlight, it gained steady interest. He maintained a development blog. There, he posted regular updates and he answered questions directly on Reddit about the game under his development name, his studio, which is Concerned Ape, all one word.
Nice. That's an awesome name.
Over time, a small, devoted community formed around this project. There were players that even offered to test the game. They beta tested it. There, they would offer feedback through Trello boards and through forums that were set up. But at this point, when Barone was thinking about releasing it, He really had to work to resist the trend, the early access trend. He didn't want to charge for something unfinished. It felt wrong. He didn't think that early access fit the kind of experience that he was building. Stardew Valley to him wasn't meant to feel like a work in progress sandbox. It was being designed as a cohesive world, and to him, it needed to feel complete. So it was around this time that the UK based publisher Chucklefish approached him. Chucklefish had a promising proposition for him. They offered to support him with their infrastructure and marketing clout, but would allow the development of the game to remain entirely his. So he shook their hand, made the partnership, and continued on the work, continued on the solo work, the solo art, the solo programming, the solo music. He was a one man show who worked on this stuff for years upon years upon years. By 2016, after nearly 4 years of solitary work, Stardew Valley was finally ready. It would launch on Steam for $14.99. Not with an early access label, not with a roadmap promising features that didn't exist yet, just a complete game. A complete game that launched on February 26, 2016. There was no press conference, no stage presentation, no midnight retail lines, none of the spectacle that everything else on that Steam page had existed with Stardew Valley. It was just a Steam page going live. Barone spent that entire day refreshing the Steam backend dashboard. That's a private page where developers can see their sales in real time. And those numbers begin to move rapidly. Within hours, reviews were appearing. They were not mixed. They were not cautiously optimistic. They were overwhelmingly positive. Players were streaming their farms on Twitch. Reddit threads were multiplying. Word of mouth spread faster than any marketing push could have manufactured. And again, within 12 days, he sold roughly 400,000 copies.
That's insane.
At $14.99 a pop, that meant millions of dollars in revenue from a project built entirely by one person.
I mean, hey, he put the time into it, though.
He sure did. He sure did. And if you break that 4 years into what he made off of it, he still made a killing compared to most of us. So
Absolutely.
it made all that time worth it and with the click of a button. By early April, 400,000 copies turned into 830,000 copies. Now
God damn.
to compare, many indie games at that time considered 100,000 lifetime sales a success.
God.
Stardew
Wow.
passed that in 10 days. 10 days.
That's insane.
And it wasn't climbing in isolation, right? Again, this is the same storefront where The Division was dominating pre orders, where Fallout 4 and Far Cry Primal were still charting near the top. Stardew Valley wasn't in some niche corner of Steam. It was right there, right on the main page with the top dogs. Players weren't just buying it, they were rallying around it. Threads appeared where people offered to purchase extra copies for those who couldn't afford it. Some who admitted to pirating the game publicly stated that they intended to buy it later to support the developer. And in turn, Barone responded in kind, right? When bugs were reported, patches followed quickly. He literally fixed corrupt save files manually for a few players.
Oh, shit.
He answered questions directly. He softened mechanics that clashed with the tone he wanted. Inevitably, there was no separation between developer and audience. This success wasn't just momentum, this success was trust. You know, Rob, what really stands out to me about Stardew Valley is that there wasn't a wall between Barone and the people playing his game. It was direct, personal, and built on trust.
Right, Dave. No layers of management, no PR filter. Just one person making something and responding to the people experiencing it.
Exactly. And honestly, that's what I love about podcasting when you got the right platform. And the right platform is Zencaster. It's the all in one podcasting solution that lets you create, record, and publish without a middleman.
So I won't need a studio or a production team just to get started?
Not at all. You log in through your browser, hit record, and you're instantly capturing studio quality audio and up to 4K video. There's no complicated setup, no barrier between you and your audience.
Okay, but what if something goes wrong mid recording? Baroni had to patch bugs. What's the safety net here?
Well, Zencaster has multi-layered backups, so even if your connection drops, your recordings stay safe and the highest quality. You don't lose your work.
And editing? I'm guessing I don't have to spend months polishing it alone in my apartment.
Nope. Zencaster's post production tools automatically remove background noise, trim filler words, and balance your levels. You get clean professional sound without the burnout.
All right, but once it's ready, how do I share it?
Well, that's the best part. Zencaster also lets you distribute your podcast directly to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other major platforms, all from a single dashboard. You can create it, polish it, publish it, all in one place.
So the connection stays direct.
Exactly. Go to zencaster.com/pricing and use our code all one word memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. If you've got something if you've got something you care about, this makes it easier than ever to share.
Build it, put it out there. See who shows up.
That's absolutely right. Head over to Zencaster, use our code all one word memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month.
And now, let's get back to the game. That kind of trust doesn't just happen, Dave. What was it about the game itself that made it stick?
Well, you know, that trust held. The trust that Barone that existed between Barone and his players of Stardew. That trust held because the game itself supported it. On the surface, Stardew Valley doesn't look very revolutionary. You inherit a farm, you plant crops, you water them, you sleep, you repeat, right? Some players have jokingly called it a chore simulator, and yet millions describe it as relaxing, invigorating, and comforting. And now part of that comes down to pacing, right? In the mid 2010s, most of those blockbuster games we talked about, Fallout Division, Call of Duty, they emphasize constant simulation, right? There are flashing objectives and dense map markers and escalating combat. Stardew Valley moved very differently. There was no ticking clock forcing you to optimize. There's no harsh fail state. There was even an in-game evaluation system, was softened. You weren't being judged. You were choosing how to spend your time. That opening scene makes that explicit. The player leaves a corporate office job to inherit a small plot of land. So it isn't an escape from work entirely. It's a choice of a different kind of work, right? You can farm, fish, mine. Um, you can raise livestock. You can automate everything with sprinklers or just ignore efficiency entirely, right? If you don't care about efficiency, you can make your farm as haphazardly and sloppy as you want. It doesn't matter. There is no single correct path. Baroni has said that he wanted the world to feel natural, inspired partly by the Pacific Northwest where he grew up. So it's got earth tones and seasonal rhythms and gentle music. There's difficulty, of course, but it's localized. Fishing requires skill. The mines can be dangerous. In each of these, improvement feels kind of gradual. And then there's the town, right? The town is all about socializing. So Baroni built this entire world. If you don't want to farm 24/7. You don't have to. You can go and socialize with the villagers. You can get married. You can start a family. You can go shopping, and you have a choice to support a small business or support the corporate Joja Mart that's in it. Like, there are all these different paths that you can take, and not one of them is right. You can do one of them. You can do all of them. You it's just one of those games that doesn't force you to do anything. And that's a rarity, I would say. And then there's what the game doesn't do. You know, the game doesn't try to resolve every storyline with every character neatly. Some character arcs are open-ended. Years later, Barone will admit that he sometimes wished he had fleshed them out more, but often hesitates when he says that because he also feels that leaving space for interpretation makes that experience more personal, right? Stardew is like the ultimate cozy game. It is a game that you sit down and you play, for me personally, when I don't want to have to think about things, when I don't want to have to, you know, fight for my life, so to speak, or think about what my next move is going to be in terms of strategy or solve that puzzle. It's just a game to chill. It's just a chill game. That early sales surge was only the beginning. By the end of 2016, Stardew Valley had crossed the 1 million copy mark on PC alone. And while that alone would have cemented it as a major indie success, it did not stay confined to Steam, right? In 2017, the game launched on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Later that year, it arrived on the Nintendo Switch, which is a platform it has done incredibly well on, that really proved to be an ideal match for its portable seasonal rhythm. I think the Switch and its more cozy attitude and alternate games like Animal Crossing gave Stardew a platform that it did really well on, you know? The Switch version dramatically expanded the reach of the game. By early 2018, cumulative sales of Stardew had surpassed 3.5 million copies across all the platforms. Unlike many other single player games that were on our list, Fallout and The Division, all that, momentum for Stardew just did not taper off for whatever reason. In 2018, multiplayer finally arrived as a free update. It was a feature that had been promised years earlier in the development phase, so farms could now be shared, and that quiet solo experience could be expanded into a cooperative experience with your friends. Like I had said in the beginning, there are different farms you can choose from. I've only done the standard one, but one of them is specifically designed with 4 players in mind. And then again in 2020, during the pandemic, player counts for Stardew surged again. So, as millions of people found themselves at home looking for slower paced digital spaces, Stardew Valley fit the bill, and the game experienced this renewed wave of popularity. I think during this time, for many, it became a form of comfort gaming, right? A place that you could manage something small and controllable when the outside world was chaos, and lack of stability. It was unstable for all of us. And so by the end of 2020, as a result, lifetime sales had climbed past 10 million copies. And then in late 2020 and early 2021, there was a massive update, what we call the 1.5 update, and that added new areas, new characters, and a lot of endgame content, all released again free of charge. So by 2022, total sales crossed 20 million, and they kept climbing. Mobile ports came out and broadened the audience further. The game kept getting patched, so that maintained goodwill with the community. So as the decade progressed, now 2022 were 6 years, 2023 were 7 years. The community support for the game grew, right? And that support extended beyond the game itself. By the early 2020s, there were more than 28,000 mods for this game.
God damn. That's a
There
lot of
were
mods.
there were entire expansions that added new characters and new regions. There were new dialogue, new creatures, new this, new that. There was a new just about everything. There were mod creators that would eventually join the official development efforts. So the community was brought in to actually shape the future of the game. So in response to that, in 2021, Barone migrated the game from what he originally wrote it on, which was Microsoft's XNA framework, to monogame framework, which effectively future-proofed it and expanded mod support. So he recognized the need to make it easier for the community to expand it, because at this point, to him, Stardew was a world. It was not just a finished game, it was this whole ecosystem that people were participating in. And so he wanted to make that ecosystem more accessible. And so the mono game framework is better suited for that. So the whole game was migrated to mono game in 2021. Somewhere in the mid 2020s, last year, this year, somewhere 2024, 2025, 2026, I don't know. Cumulative sales exceeded 50 million copies worldwide. So now we're at 50 million copies. I think it's fair to say that at this point, Stardew Valley is no longer simply this little breakout indie success, right? It at 50 million copies, it is one of the best-selling video games of all time. It achieved that status without sequels, without any seasonal anything, without annualization, without microtransaction economies that, drive recurring revenue. It just existed and grew through steady, sustained support and word of mouth. And as a result, I think it's also fair to say that Stardew Valley has become a reference point, right? In the years that followed its launch, farming role playing games experienced a notable resurgence. There are titles like My Time at Portia, The Story of Seasons revivals, Coral Island, Sunhaven. There are lots of others that have entered the market. Most of these games openly cite Stardew Valley as their inspiration. The original Harvest Moon, the game that inspired Stardew Valley, the franchise itself underwent restructuring and rebranding during this period, with Marvelous continuing the series under the Story of Seasons name. We've done a whole episode on why that is and where the series has gone. If you want to check that out, go look at our archives. The farming sim genre, a genre that had once felt niche on PCs, was now a firmly established genre. And more broadly, Stardew Valley has become central to what would later be described as the cozy game movement, right? It's a category of games emphasizing low stress gameplay, community interaction, and gentle pacing. And so while the term cozy game gained popularity in the early 2020s, its, I guess, modern visibility, um, modern commercial viability, rather, can be traced directly to the success of Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley demonstrated that large audiences would invest long term in games without competitive pressure or high stake combat loops or aggressive monetization, right? In a lot of ways, it also influenced expectations around post launch support. Free content updates over multiple years, in this case, built an unusual level of trust between the developer and the audience. So at this time, when downloadable expansions and microtransactions were standard revenue models, Stardew Valley showed that sustained goodwill could function as a long term growth engine, right? By continuing to update the game years after release and by supporting modding rather than restricting it, for instance, Barone helped establish this template for community driven longevity in indie development. So there was no sequel required. There is no annual release cycle. There's no franchise machine. There is just a single evolving game. There is just Stardew Valley. 10 years later, Stardew Valley is again frequently cited in development interviews, genre discussions, and sale comparisons. It's the modern benchmark for farming RPGs on PC and consoles, and I think perhaps more importantly, it had shifted perception completely. You know, in 2016, a solo developer competing with AAA releases on Steam felt unusual, but by the 2020s, it felt possible. 10 years later, we're celebrating 10 years. Stardew Valley is no longer this surprise indie hit beneath Fallout 4 on the top sellers page, right? It's one of the best selling games ever released. There are concert tours built around its soundtrack. There's a board game adaptation. There's generations of cozy games that are now influenced by success. In 2016, it was a quiet indie release competing with blockbusters. In 2026, it remains one of the industry's most defining success stories. And the reality is, it started out as a simple resume project. As always, if today's episode got you thinking about other games that grew from small beginnings into something much bigger, we've covered a few of those stories before. Back in episode 266, we explored how The Binding of Isaac transformed a deeply personal experiment into one of the defining indie games of its era. In episode 192, we looked at how Minecraft evolved from a one man project into a global phenomenon that reshaped how players thought about creativity and ownership. And in episode 146, we revisited Among Us, a game that also found also found a new, resurgence after release during COVID and became this, source of comfort and connection during an uncertain time. You can, of course, find those episodes along with our entire back catalog. You can, of course, find those episodes along with our entire back catalog organized by topic, by date, at memorycardlane.com. You'll also find any of our episodes that you want to know anything about, any of our stories. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
You can find our calendar of our future episode topics, so maybe you can still find what you're looking for if we haven't recorded it yet, but will in the coming months or years. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I, maybe hang out in some of those crazy multiplayer game lobbies that we mentioned earlier on in the episode. You can find our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad-free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. And you can find us on social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, a technology, a console, maybe even covered a few places as well. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. When we sit down to research new topics each week, we get excited when we find out new things to share with you. It's this fantastic cycle of learning and teaching, teaching and learning, and in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, Dave, I think the biggest takeaway is a pretty obvious one that this was just something for a resume that ended up taking 4 years, which, hopefully he found some other good work in the meantime, because 4 years with no job is pretty rough. But 4 years for a resume builder, and, it became his resume. I mean, it's a pretty damn good one at that for one person to make a game that made that much, sold that many copies, and is still successful to this day. It's kind of a wild story. It's not one we hear very often. Normally, we hear about large teams, and yeah, they can be successful, but sometimes they flop. Obviously, there's always something that we can learn from them, which is why we talk about them. But this one's a pretty unique story, and I think it's pretty goddamn awesome.
Yeah, this one is special. It's solid. It's a solid effort for years upon years upon years, and it's a unique success. You wouldn't on paper think that this would be successful if you went back 10 years ago and someone was like, I'm making this pixel art farming game. I don't think anyone in their right mind at the time would have been like, bet 50 million copies, right?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, even now, I wouldn't imagine that right off the rip.
There was just something about this right place, right time with the right effort. And I do think that Baroni had a lot to do with it. His community, the way he interacts with his community has a lot to do with it. Has a lot to do with it. He is an easy person to root for. And I think that has a lot to do with how a community perceives a game and how they rally around a game, right? You want to support the little guy. You want to put your money and your clout behind the good guy. This is definitely a David versus Goliath story in a lot of ways because Baroni did not go to a big publisher. He remained a solo development effort and it paid off for him, you know?
Yeah, and it also speaks to the testament of how important it can be to have feedback, or to rather respond to feedback from your gaming community. I mean, one recent example would have to be Helldivers 2, in which the developers were constantly talking about the game with people and trying to take ideas and incorporating them. And this is an earlier on idea of that, or an early on example of that. And it just goes to show that when you listen to your community and you improve on things that a game that people already love, but you make it more of what they can love, it just blows up.
It does.
So that's it for me, Dave. Did you have something different, or what's your takeaway?
That's a great question. You know, I've known the story of Stardew. As Stardew gained popularity, the news stories about it were all over the place, right? One man solo show, this, that. I didn't realize it was such a grind. You know what I mean? So the 70-hour work weeks was kind of shocking, especially when you consider what they resulted in, right? Because like you got a game that's developed in a crunch, like a AAA title, and it made one of the most chill games of all time, right? So it's this weird dichotomy that I found really interesting. Yeah, I guess that's my big takeaway. I didn't know about the 70 weeks. I didn't know that he worked as an usher to put himself, to just make ends meet. This takes a kind of patience and perseverance that I don't think I have, and it's super impressive. It's just super impressive,
Oh,
and
it is all around.
I am looking forward to his next game, which is Haunted Chocolatier. Haunted Chocolatier.
Sounds interesting. I'm in.
Yeah, definitely interested in his next one whenever he gets around to it. All right, Rob. Well, before I wrap up this episode and look at next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll just take I'll just take one quick moment to say thank you so much to all of our listeners. It means the world to us that you've either been here for the long run in these few years we've been doing this, or the short term, and you're only listening to your first episode. Either way, we're appreciative of you, and we hope that you continue to listen. And maybe we'll continue talking about some games that you love, and obviously talk about games that we find have made an impact in the gaming community.
Right on. Stardew Valley didn't arrive with spectacle. It didn't need a cinematic reveal or a roadmap promising years of content. What it offered instead was something quieter. It offered consistency, a world that moved at its own pace, a developer who showed up when something broke, a game that didn't rush you, manipulate you, or overwhelm you. In an era defined by scale, Stardew Valley proved that intention still mattered, that a single person working patiently and listening closely could build something that felt personal to millions. It wasn't just about farming mechanics or nostalgia for Harvest Moon. It was about the relationship between creator and player, about releasing something finished, caring for it afterward, and letting word of mouth do what marketing campaigns often try to force. Nearly a decade later, Stardew Valley still feels steady. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not because it became one of the most successful indie games ever made, but that it reminded the industry something simple. Players don't always need bigger. Sometimes they just need something honest, something that shows up as advertised, steady, complete, and true to its promise. In an industry that often overpromises and revises later, that kind of clarity feels almost radical. and gamers have always rewarded radical ideas, new genres, new mechanics, new ways to play. We celebrate games that take risks and move the medium forward. In 2016, Stardew Valley proved that radical doesn't always mean bigger or louder. Sometimes the boldest thing a game can do is simply be honest, and players rewarded it in kind. Next week, we're trading quiet farms and gentle pacing for flashing lights, crowded arcades, and the sound of quarters hitting glass. Released in 1991, Street Fighter II didn't just refine the fighting game formula, it defined it. With its distinct roster of global warriors, precise controls, and competitive depth, Capcom's arcade classic transformed one on one battles into a cultural phenomenon. From Rue's Hadouken to the rise of local rivalries that would eventually evolve into the modern fighting game community, Street Fighter II wasn't just another sequel. It was the moment competitive gaming found its footing. So join us as we step up to the cabinet, pick our fighters, and explore how Street Fighter II reshaped arcades and rewrote the rules of head to head play on next week's trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Skibby doom dap 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 doo ow.